Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcome Paul Wotton. Paul is the Executive Director of the Biotech Launchpad at Rice University. The Launchpad is an accelerator focused on the translation of the university's health and medical technology discoveries and moving them to be cures and to help patients all over the globe. Who Paul is to me is builder, and he uses that word himself in our conversation. He is a builder with the ability to dream big, but then also bring those big dreams and those big architectures, to use the building metaphor, into executable plans. And he's passionate about coming alongside these companies at the Launchpad and helping them to create a vision for what will be because of their technology and their platform 10 years from now. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Paul Wotton. Paul Wotton, welcome to the show. So excited to have you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. It's nice to be with you.
So I just did a brief introduction of you, what you're up to, and who you are to me. But would you mind letting us know what you're up to in the world right now?
Certainly. So at the moment, I'm involved with an exciting project down in Houston, Texas, which is known as the Biotech Launchpad at Rice University. And we're making very good progress there. And I'm helping people who are developing technologies at Rice, mainly in the bioengineering and cell engineering departments, to start thinking about how they can commercialize their technology, actually by getting these into the clinic quickly. So we're actually taking these bioengineering solutions to medical problems and working backwards from how we can help patients in terms of how you design that product to work in a patient population. And all of the work we're doing actually is in conjunction with leading medical centers at MD Anderson and Baylor, for example. So that's one part of it. And then I'm doing some board work as well. Just got back from a trip down to Australia where a piece of news came out last week that one of the companies there, Sonata Therapeutics, is running a trial with an iPSC derived mesenchymal stem cell for graft versus host disease, and they just had 2-year data published in Nature, which is really exciting. So I was down there for a meeting on that last week, just got back at the weekend, and now getting ready to go to France for an international meeting on bioelectronics. And that's actually being worked with Rice as well. We're having a seminar over there, quite a large international seminar on the next generation of biotherapeutics, which interface with electronics. So it's keeping me out of trouble.
I'm curious, at the Launchpad, what is, you talked about the help that you're providing these companies. What is your unique role in serving and helping those companies?
That's a good question. So I think my career history has been with, in the last 25 years or so, focusing on how do you turn platforms into products. And I started out actually in the 90s with a company that was in the drug delivery space. And I was charged with turning a platform, which was 5 guys in a lab, into a business. And that business actually was floated on NASDAQ in 1998. But the discipline I learned there in terms of strategy, how you plan, all the components of building a business from a technology platform were learned in the early 90s. And since then, that's what I focused on. So what I'm doing right now is helping people think through what does it take to take their technology and turn it into a product. And it covers everything from thinking about the patient, number one, that's the most important piece. In the case of cell and gene therapies, you have to pay a lot of attention to manufacturing. What research do you need to do to support it? How do you get into an IND? What you do in terms of thinking about financing, and also how do you let people know what you're doing? because I think that part of this is being able to communicate what you're doing effectively. So I'm actually helping them think through that, and helping PhDs and postdoctoral students think about, how do I turn this into a business and be very entrepreneurial? So we're doing that. The advantage of doing that down in Houston at the moment is that Rice is situated just across the road from the Texas Medical Center, which includes facilities like MD Anderson, Houston Methodist, Children's Hospital, Baylor. And we have access to world-class research folk down there, world-class physicians, and more recently a world-class park, which is specifically built to incubate new biotech companies, that was put in place by Bill McEwen, who's the CEO at Texas Medical Center. So I'm working on that, and I really enjoy helping people think through this problem of how do you turn a technology into a business, because there's a lot of folk develop a technology platform and they take an approach where they're looking at developing products that work, but sometimes they're not needed by clinicians or patients. So you have to think in terms of what's the end goal here. And I actually think it leads to a better PhD or postgraduate program result if you think about a problem, a big problem that is, that you can solve using your own approach to the technology.
Why this and why now?
Well, I've run 5 companies. I'm on the board of several companies. I've grown up mainly with a business development background, although I'm a scientist by training. And I'm on the back nine of my career. And I've had some success with companies, but I wanted to spend some time being able to teach other people what I've been lucky enough to learn through mentors that I've had, training I've had, but also at Houston, I also see a massive opportunity, and I really do mean that, to make a big difference to the biotech industry down in Houston, which has all the components of success. And we're just helping to put those together to build successful businesses down there and get them to patients, for example, who are suffering from cancer and other dread diseases effectively. So it's really about trying to take these solutions into patients and just passing on what I know in terms of how to do that and building a sustainable business enterprise around it.
I'm curious about your unique story here. There's a quote that we love here on the show by John Ruskin that says that the reward for our work, or I think he uses the word toil, the reward for our work is not what we get, but who we become. Who have you become as you look at the last quarter century? You said 25 years, that you're becoming probably extends even beyond that. Who have you become, Paul?
That's a good question. So actually, I'm thinking back, it's actually more than 30 years I've been doing this. So I think that the starting point for me actually was, my father was an architect, and he used to design quite large buildings in the City of London, complex projects. And I think that building a business is very similar. So I kind of view myself as an architect of businesses from a technology background, if you will. So I'm helping people to do that now, but all of my business career has been about how do I create a business out of this opportunity? And through that, I've been able to build a pretty good network of folk that I know in this country and actually beyond. I've been lucky enough to work internationally as well. I spent some time in Canada. I worked for a company in Milan. I've done business in Japan, sold one company to a Japanese company, Astellas. So I'm also able to, and I really enjoy meeting people from different cultures actually, and doing business with them. And I think the other part of this is that I've been able to build great teams around me. And I've been lucky enough to work with really terrific people in companies that I've been in. And I've learned how to, I think, really create effective teams that work together very, very well, whether that's from the company I work with or building relationships of partners who we are also working together to create value for patients.
Hmm. I love this picture of a builder. There's one of my mentors. He has given me this picture. He said the thing about a leader and their becoming is that they're like a densely populated city, and that if you're going to build something new, you first have to tear something down, to excavate it, so that you can build the new thing. So
Right.
as you think about your story over the last 30 years or more, what has had to get deconstructed so that you could build?
So the lessons I've learned in that are that sometimes, and I've gone into businesses, for example, where technology founders are working on a program, and sometimes they choose a project to work on and get quite a long way with it, where they choose an obvious drug to combine with their delivery technology, as an example. But oftentimes that's the easy path towards showing it works. But you have to choose the difficult path, which is, can I make it work? Can I get it through development? And can I get it to patients, which may not be such an easy thing to do. So you have to look for solutions that are possibly not pioneered in the past, for example, where you're engineering something to be successful. And actually, there's a great example in my last company, Obsidian, where the company had a platform to regulate protein production by cells. And we'd chosen a cytokine IL-15, which is used in oncology. And we're working with other partners on CAR-T, for example, in different cytokines. But we own that one, and we were looking for what should we do with that IL-15 technology we had. And the obvious answer was, let's take it into CAR-T. And then when you actually look at that opportunity, it's quite a crowded space. And we looked at NK cells because that was another place to go. But the one that we ended up going to was actually tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, where engineered lymphocytes using that approach of membrane-bound IL-15 had not been used before. No one had even done it. And in actual fact, I can tell you truthfully that when we actually had that idea in the labs at Obsidian, they had never managed to engineer a TIL, period. And we took that project on, but we knew that if we actually got it right, there was a big market opportunity for that. And before I left the company, we got that program into our first patient at MD Anderson at the back end of, 2022. And that patient is still alive today. And they were a stage 4 melanoma patient. So the technology worked really, really well. But that was something where we had to literally deconstruct all the preconceived ideas that they had at the company when I came in and build something from scratch that would be commercially viable, would actually help patients and had a market need. So that's one example where I've had to go in and change what was ingrained thinking. There are others. With Antares, for example, we had a platform which I ended up selling to a drug company, which I didn't think was the opportunity for us. And we took that particular company, which was partnering with companies like Teva to work with their drugs. And the opportunity there for me was to see that if we were able to develop our own products using, actually it was auto-injector technology, that we could turn that into a specialty pharmaceutical company, but also develop some really interesting programs. One of which is a product called Zyosted, which is a testosterone replacement. And that one, we trialed a new route of administration. We tried a new injector device, and it turned out to be the best product on the market now. But putting a company into development mode to develop a drug product is very different from developing a delivery technology, just that, and then licensing that out. So I think that that's another example where you had to sort of start with a white sheet of paper, build a plan around it, and be quite disciplined about milestones and things like that to know that you're on track. You can raise money around those. And in actual fact, that company got bought by Halozyme about a couple of years ago for almost $1 billion. When I started at the company, it was a $23 million market cap.
What about in your own story? You referred to your building as a leader. As a leader, what belief or mindset had to get torn down in order for you to grow as a leader?
It's a good question, actually. I think that, so I've worked in a few countries, and I moved here actually, first of all, from the UK, London, which is where I'm from. And getting used to the cultural difference was definitely something that I had to learn fairly quickly. And anyone who's worked in England and America knows that although we speak a similar language, the cultural differences can be quite significant. And I actually like the American culture a lot. I like the can-do mentality that people have here. And the other thing that I found was important was that in this country, you deal with a lot of diversity in terms of people you manage. And so it gave me much more of an appreciation of why creating teams from people with different backgrounds actually matters. And I'm not just talking about sort of ethnic backgrounds or different races, but also different scientific disciplines as well, because I think that it's important to think about that, because you get better creativity if you can actually mix it up. And what I've learned is that I never judge people by their technical qualifications or where they're from. My number one criteria when I'm working with people is how do I get along with them and how will they get along with the rest of the team? So I've built teams based on interpersonal chemistry, and it's always been really, really successful. And I've also inherited teams that weren't getting along, but were able to turn them into a team that had a lot of success, Antares being one of them, actually. So it's actually just this being able to work with people from different disciplines, different countries, different backgrounds, and being agnostic or forming any sort of idea about them before you meet them, I think is really, really important. That's probably my most significant lesson in life in general, as well as in business.
Yeah, and it strikes me that, we naturally, many times we will gravitate to that homogeneous mix of people. And what I'm hearing you describe is the shift in thinking to be drawn actually to diversity, and of diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background. I can imagine that came with, while you saw the benefit, that also comes with some discomfort, to move out of a comfort zone. Was that part of your story, moving through some discomfort?
Possibly, yes. The first lesson I learned was, so I was lucky enough to do a PhD in the UK at University of Nottingham, which is quite well known. And halfway through my PhD, I won a scholarship and took myself off to Copenhagen to learn about how to actually work with skin membranes, real skin from surgical procedures, and use those in my PhD program. And I flew to Copenhagen, was lucky enough that at least in Copenhagen, most people do understand and speak English. But a lot of the time I was in a culture that was completely different. I was 23 years old, and I actually enjoyed the experience a lot. And some of the challenges you face when you're in a different country and there are language difficulties really you grow up very, very quickly there. Sometimes you have to rely on yourself to solve things. And so that was my first experience. And then I worked for two American companies, Merck and Abbott. With Merck, I spent some time over here in the US working on a program that was completely unrelated to my day-to-day responsibilities in the development labs. It was actually an IT program that we were implementing. And I got to live over here for a short time, loved it. And it was quite challenging because it was in the middle of winter and I'd never seen ice storms or snowstorms as big as they had down in West Point. Quite close to where I live now, actually. So I got a sort of real good exposure to international business. My first business-to-business commercial role was actually based in Europe. So every other week I was going off to Switzerland, Germany, France, and finding my way around. And I became very self-reliant. And I think that's sort of molded what I've become today, because I don't get fazed by any challenge now. And I think part of that is because very early on I was exposed to that as a student. And even as a kid, actually, I was always doing things that were exploratory. My mother used to describe me as very curious, and I think that's probably true.
I remember you sharing with me in an earlier conversation about watching the moon landing and how that sparked this imagination, this anything is possible, unfazed by most things. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are, actually. So I was a little kid when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and I was obsessed with that space program, and in actual fact, astronomy in general. And the way that America managed to do that in less than a decade from the Kennedy speech, actually down at Rice, was quite incredible, because if you put your mind to something, you can really do it. And that was the thing that came through to me, was I want to go and work in an environment where people think really big and solve hard problems. And that was a great example. It's very inspirational. And the space programs are running today are still very inspirational. But I think what that shows is if you actually set a target, it's a business lesson for sure, and you get the right team of people together and you just keep going, but you do a lot of planning up front, and you have all these contingency plans in place, then you will succeed. There's no doubt about it. And that's what that was my first exposure to American sort of values was really the space program. And then I was lucky enough, I went to a Catholic boys' school in the UK, and we had American kids there as well in our classes. A lot of them were kids whose fathers were diplomats or working with oil companies, for example. And they always had a very sort of positive attitude to life compared to some of my British colleagues. And I feel that's quite an inspirational approach to life in general. But the space program for sure was one that demonstrated to me that if you really think big and you want to solve a big problem, then just go for it. And with enough persistence and determination, you'll get there.
This idea of thinking big makes me think about the name of our show, Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. What are those challenging, audacious, big ideas that you wish your colleagues in the life science space would be having more of?
Oh, wow. That's a hard question to answer, actually. I can say what I like people doing a lot of, right? Which is, so one of my mentors and colleagues in the past has been Bob Langer, who, as everyone knows, is a very successful professor from MIT who started many companies and been involved with some of the biggest successes in medicine, namely Moderna, as one example. But I think that it's really important for people to try and Bob always likes to think about how am I going to solve a big problem and make a meaningful difference. And he's not interested in doing Me Too stuff. So I think that the one thing I would really wish people did more of was thinking beyond Me Too type products and trying to change the paradigm for whether it's cell therapy, gene therapy, or whatever, by just being a little bit bolder and thinking about how they can apply whatever technology is to solving a big problem that might be harder to crack and might take a little longer to get there. But when you do get there, it's going to be a much better solution for everybody.
Mm. I love this idea of challenging people to go beyond the Me Too, to bring forward something we talked about a few minutes ago, this breaking down of assumptions or beliefs. What needs to be deconstructed in order for somebody to move beyond the Me Too?
I think you got to start with any company. Actually, one of the processes that I bring in is you get everyone together and sit around in a room and just start with a flip chart and say, okay, in 10 years' time, what's our vision for this company? Where do we want to go? And there's no limits on that. And it's actually interesting when you go through that exercise with people in terms of where can you take this company to? And then you work backwards from there. You go from your vision to your mission, and then you can build your strategic plan around that. So I think that the answer to the question is really getting everyone in a room together in a company and dreaming about where you can go in 10 years' time and taking all constraints off. And the other question, which I've asked people, and which was asked of me at one point in time, was if you had unlimited resources, what would you do with this company? And that's a great question to ask because, you do have difficulties sometimes getting the resources in place, but that really challenges you to think, well, what's the ideal thing we should be doing? And then you break it down into small chunks in terms of how you can get there. And that's really the nature of planning.
It almost feels like what you're asking them to do is to give their John F. Kennedy speech. In a decade, we're going to put a man on the moon, and you're challenging these companies to create their own version of that. In a decade, this is what we'll do, to make that bold declaration to themselves and to the world. That I can imagine. While exciting, that can be a little scary, especially to those coming out of academia who are very heads down at the bench, very technically focused, and you're challenging them to do something that doesn't always come naturally. Do you experience the resistance sometimes to doing that?
Not with the academics I work with.
Okay.
To say, yeah. So my colleague on the Rice Biotech Launchpad, Omid Vaser, for example, is someone who I love working with because he's a big thinker too. He actually came out of the Langer lab. And we're working on a project now, which is to create a miniaturized protein factory that you could implant subcutaneously. It relies on technology coming out of Northwestern Rice, another institute, Georgia Tech is another one, where we're able to take a small implant, create an oxygenation component to it, which will allow you to keep a cell population alive that can secrete proteins. And we're talking about years now, not months or weeks, but years that potentially can work for. So, that's the idea. So what's the big picture here? There are hundreds of proteins that are used today in medicine, and they're all made in stainless steel vats in vast manufacturing facilities across the world. And there's a lot of infrastructure, and it's quite a costly infrastructure as well. But what if you could actually use that little device and use that as the factory in your own body, which you can control as well? That's important too. And you could secrete a native protein, which will be better for patients anyway. than some of these recombinant proteins. So we're actually thinking, well, this could be a game-changing technology in 10, 20, 30 years, where you're starting to make these expensive proteins more accessible, but create a very successful business around it, whether you're trying to secrete monoclonal antibodies or other proteins like cytokines. That's the business idea that we're working on right now. And that is a big problem. But it's also one that we're not afraid to tackle. And in actual fact, the validation of this is simply because we've managed to score some really big R4H grants recently to do this work. So it's being validated by really good intellectuals and doers at agencies like R4H and DARPA. So I know we're on the right track, but it's much more difficult starting from that point of view and working how you get there than just doing step-by-step experimentation to prove the concept of we can make a protein, and then what should we do next? It starts with the big picture. So we can actually revolutionize biological manufacturing now using this approach. And I think that's a really exciting prospect. So that's the next project I'm actually working on with Omid and colleagues from Northwestern, Georgia Tech, Carnegie Mellon. And we're constructing that company now. It's going to be called Durasite. And we just won a big award for that one. And I'm talking like $45-50 million to actually get that project off the ground.
I can imagine, you talked about you don't get much resistance on the dreaming big piece, but I have to imagine that along the way, as you're moving along that plan, and when the company becomes of a certain size, where leaders need to step up, structure needs to be applied to the organization to be able to execute on that plan, that you witness these companies facing challenges in growing, scaling a bit. What are some of those challenges that you see these companies facing as they start to execute the plan?
So that's a really great question, because at some point you have to go from that creative way of thinking to a process-based way of thinking. There's a transition point there. And, Omid, for example, he just has thousands of ideas every week. All of them are probably very good, but as a company, you have to focus on doing a few things really, really well. And I think it's actually a really good problem turning a creative group which has great ideas and being able to filter those down to several that are going to work really, really well, and then just executing against those quite rigorously, because at the end of the day, you really need what I call an EVS, an early visible success. Get it into the FDA, get it into a clinical trial, and then ultimately you're going to gain approval, because you've got to show that big idea works with at least one program and focus on that and get it into the clinic fast, which takes people with a development discipline, which is different from people with a research discipline, and implement that really rigorously. And so I think that when you actually do that, you then challenge the technology, because if you own that whole development process into the FDA and beyond, including the manufacturing, that's when you learn more about your own technology than you ever will if you just continue to do development research, if you will. So I think it's that move from big picture thinking to being focused on doing one thing really, really well is something that I'm actually quite good at being able to manage that part of the process. And so far it's been I would say I've had a reasonably successful career doing that.
Yeah, it's as I work with companies, the piece that sometimes is challenging is putting the people piece into place, and the structure and the processes you're pointing to, and getting really good narrowing the focus of that group of people on that one thing that you're pointing us to.
Yeah. And that's actually the value of getting everyone together at the start and working out what are we going to do? Who do we need to bring on board to make this work? Because most of my recent experiences have been building a company from an N equals 3 to an N equals 100 or more over a period of 2 to 3 years. And but once you've actually got that established and you've worked out what you need to do, who you need to get there, and you've actually done a really good disciplined project to see where we should use the technology first in terms of what are the patient needs and the market opportunity and how do we match our technology to that. That's a really good problem to solve. And it's actually fun doing as well. And it's also fun, make mistakes along the way. Of course you do. But actually that's part of the challenge, is to get around some of those things that can go wrong. It's the best way to learn about things in general. And I've got numerous examples of that, which I probably shouldn't mention, but being able to solve difficult problems is really one thing that if you get a good team together, you'll come out the other end of that tunnel with success.
I'm going to give you a magic wand, Paul, and you get to wave it over every single company that's at the launch phase that you support at Rice. And you get to challenge them or plant the seed with this wave of the wand for every early stage company around the globe, biopharma. What's the one conversation that you want every one of those companies, those leaders of those companies, to have over the coming couple weeks?
Speak with physicians who are actually treating patients that you want to go and treat yourself, because it's really important. And this is where having that affiliation with the Texas Medical Center at Rice is so important, because if there's a project we're working on down there right now, which is to treat lymphedema in patients who've had breast cancer. And that program has been developed with surgeons at MD Anderson. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how they think about what they do in their job, which sometimes as a scientist you don't appreciate because you're not involved in the practicalities of treating patients, right? So having them involved in that design stage very early on, I think is super important. So that's the one conversation I always ask the people when they're thinking of a project down there. My first question is, well, how many physicians have you spoken to and what have you learned? And sometimes you find people who've got to quite advanced stages in their programs and they haven't spoken to anyone on the practical side of medicine.
It's a great counsel. Paul, as we come to the end of our conversation, what would you love to highlight for us about what you're working on? You mentioned several things that you're excited about. What else would you love to highlight before we wrap?
I think that we've had a difficult time in biotech the last couple of years. There's been a bit of a financial crisis in general in our industry. We've had some notable successes recently. I think the pandemic itself showed how biotech can be really important to this world. And in fact, I would argue that the development of that vaccine saved the world. And but that's what we do. And I think that the one thing that would be really good is if that we could just create this. It is reality, but people need to understand what we do as a business. And everyone comes into this business with the same approach, which is to do a good job, number one, and help patients. We all want to do that. But unfortunately, I think pharma and biotech in general gets pinned with a bad image because we're making profit out of people's diseases. But no one goes into that business, at least I didn't, and I know a lot of others that will say the same. We went into this business because we wanted to solve big problems to help people. And if you do that, then of course you're going to be able to create a sustainable business. But I do think that in general, it would be nice if we got recognized for what we've contributed to society, what we're going to do in the future, and get away from this debate about lowering the cost of products that we develop, because there's no doubt there's some room for that, of course. But at the same time, I just don't think that, the halo of the pandemic that was created by Moderna and BioNTech and folk like that soon fell off. And we're back where we were in the 1990s now, talking about pricing. So I think as an industry, we must just focus on doing a much better job of communicating what this is all about and why it's important.
I love that. Thank you for highlighting that. Paul, if folks want to learn more about you and the Launchpad, where can we send them?
You can send them to either my LinkedIn account, which I'm on, or I think that's probably the best way to approach me.
Awesome.
And there is a contact address on the Rice Biotech Launchpad as well, which people can write into.
Great. We'll put all that in the show notes. Paul,
Okay.
Thank you so much for bringing just such interesting and fascinating aspects of your world to us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been good talking with you.